and how to get out of it also, because he's done it in the military, he's done it in civilian dispensation. He's led struggles for the betterment of Nigeria. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, I'll crave your indulgence to plead that we all get seated. It's time to listen to a great intellectual of our time who has not only taught and continues to teach, he has also practiced what he has taught us over time. I'll plead with us to please be seated so that we can I'll invite Dr. Comfort to please come and invite Professor Jega to the podium. Are we properly seated? Professor Atahiru Jega.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes. There isn't space for my staff. No, don't worry. Manage. Great Nigerian workers. Great Nigerian workers. Great Nigerian workers. Solidarity for victory. Comrade Chairman of today's occasion, Comrade Adam Aliyu Oshomole, Comrade President of the Nigeria Labour Congress, Comrade Ayuba Waba, our distinguished and revered leaders, former presidents, all distinguished guests, distinguished comrades, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here today to participate in this 40th anniversary celebration of the founding of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to Comrade Chairman for his very kind words in his remarks. Let me commend him for his courage to venture into the murky waters of Nigerian politics and to come out relatively clean. I commend him for his pioneering effort and for proving that it is possible for credible leaders of the Labour Congress to win elections even on political party platforms which are not necessarily working people's platforms. I think it is significant that opportunities are explored and courage of conviction drives what we do. I congratulate Comrade President of the NLC and all Comrade affiliate members on this occasion of the 40th anniversary of the NLC. In particular, I feel that it's a great honor done to me to be invited to deliver this lecture. I did not choose the theme of this lecture, it was given to me. So all I have done is to try my best in this presentation on labor, politics, and governance in Nigeria to contribute to a reflection of where we stand today with regards to the involvement of the trade unions and the labor movement in Nigeria in the arena of politics and political participation, and also in the broader arena of governance. By way of introduction, I commence by observing that the Nigeria Labour Congress has come a long way in the past 40 years. The journey has not been on a smooth road paved with gold and lined with roses. Rather, it has been a rough road of intense struggles, often smeared with sweat and blood of our compatriots to protect and advance the collective interests of the Nigerian workers, as well as more generally to address the overall interests of the Nigerian people. Be it under colonial rule or in the first post-colonial civilian rule or under prolonged military rule, or indeed under subsequent elected civilian administrations, the Nigeria labor movement generally, and the NLC in particular, for long has been consistent on principled advocacy and struggles for fair wages, for a living minimum wage, for improved working conditions, for human rights and freedom, and for human security of the Nigerian people more broadly defined. Indeed, as my boss in ASU and my predecessor as president of ASU, the late Festus Iyayi, has argued when he delivered the 30th anniversary lecture of NLC, the NLC's main contribution is in its pursuit of what he called a vision for national liberation more than its contribution to national development. This is the role of the Nigeria Labour Congress in conscientizing the Nigerian people on the need to be liberated from all forms of exploitation and domination, be it by foreign or domestic exploiters. In the course of the struggles of the labor movement and the NLC in the past 40 years, successes have been more assured and asserted when unity of purpose has been displayed, when leadership displayed integrity and selflessness, and when working people's resourcefulness has been harnessed and tapped to maximum for overall benefits, and also when a broad alliance of progressive forces is maximally deployed and utilized. On the contrary, success has been limited at all times when the movement succumbed to machinations or mischief and the intrigues by ruling and governing classes, when it was riddled by petty leadership rivalries and divided by sectarian squabbles and by superfluous and quite often vague ideological quarrelsomeness, and when it was weakened by leaders who placed their personal, selfish, or political interests over and above collective interests. The successes recorded, in spite of the profound challenges, which the movement has had to grapple with, especially in the period of neoliberal ascendancy in the global power equations, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the pervasive imposition of structural adjustment programs inspired by the IMF and the World Bank, are pointers to how the working people truly, the union makes us strong, and how we must take serious, reaffirm, and be committed to solidarity forever. Contemporarily, labor movements throughout Africa can be said to be in a state of flux. The ascendancy of neoliberal economic tendencies pushed by the IMF and the World Bank seem to have undermined organized labor's capacity to mobilize and effectively intervene in the political economies of Africa. Yet, paradoxically, at no time in recent history do workers need more effective organizational and institutional platforms for collective action more than now. The struggles waged by trade unions and their umbrella organization, the NLC, can be categorized into three, although these, of course, are intricately linked. The struggle facing private sector employers to protect and advance the interest of workers or members, the struggles as an umbrella organization of trade unions facing governments or regimes, the state being, in the Nigerian context, a major employer of labor in the sprawling public sector, and thirdly, the struggle is a popular tribune protecting and advancing the interests of the Nigerian people, not just workers, against predatory state officials and politicians and vested foreign interests who trample upon people's fundamental rights while using misgovernance to corner and vandalize public resources, and who by so doing undermine security, prosperity, equity in running and managing affairs of our motherland. If one were to rate these phases and categories of struggles, one would say that over the last 40 years, the NLC has recorded relative successes. But of course, there were serious challenges and in some cases, even failures. And this raises the predicament of labor's moderate and inadequate gains arising from its engagement with the political and governance processes in our country. So I want us to reflect deeply today as we celebrate the 40 years anniversary of the NLC. And I want us in particular to take note and to take into account the following pertinent points. One, there is a vast scope for labor movement's impactful engagement with politics and governance in our country, yet untapped. We must bear this in mind. Secondly, opportunities have been squandered in the past, particularly since the IBB military regime's dubious politics of transition, up to the return of civil democratic rule in 1999. And we must ensure that such opportunities are never squandered again. And thirdly, the labor movement needs to learn from its past mistakes and also from its past experiences, and to seize existing opportunities to re-strategize, revitalize, and reposition itself for impactful engagement with the political and governance processes for the forthcoming political dispensation in 2019 and beyond. However, before deliberating further on these points, we need to first properly conceptualize notions or concepts of labor and politics and labor and governance. And I try to do this in the context of Nigerian politics and governance processes historically. So on the notion of labor and politics, I think it is pertinent to begin with the question, what is the appropriate role of organized labor in politics? In answering this question, one can say that historically, the failure of conventional political parties and what I will call professional politicians who come to power on the platform of these conventional political parties to change the fortunes of citizens generally, and the working peoples in particular, has agitated radical socialists in and out of the labor movement who could not otherwise come to power through a socialist revolution to strive to build a party for workers to fend for themselves in electoral politics, ostensibly to use them as platform for access to power and to change the fortunes of the working classes with better policies and better governance processes. Historically, there are also several models of labor engagements with politics worldwide. The first model is predicated on labor movements' ideologically based engagement with politicians in the political sphere, such as when trade unions identify with a particular, often left or liberal inclined political party and or candidate and mobilize resources and support for their electoral victory. This model was popularized by the American Federation of Labor / the Council of Industrial Relations, AFL-CIO, in the USA. Beginning from 1881, the AFL, long before it merged with CIO in 1955, espoused the commitment to, I quote, rewarding political friends and punishing enemies regardless of their party affiliations, end of quote. In 1906, it created a labor representation committee and began a long history of alliance with and support for the American Democratic Party. According to Wikipedia, and I quote, AFL/CIO engages in substantial political spending activism typical in support of Democrats and liberals or progressive policies, end of quote. This organization has essentially kept that tradition and has also influenced many trade unions throughout the world to imbibe and deploy such value orientation and accompanying strategy. The second model is a situation in which trade unions singly or in alliances with other progressive forces in a country launch a political platform or political party and actively join the political fray for contestations for elections. This model originated in Britain in 1900 when the British Trade Union Congress formed the Labour Party, and this has been in the 20th century popularized by the successes of solidarity movement in Poland in the 1980s and 1990s, and the coming into power of Lech Walesa, a popular trade union leader of dock workers in Poland, as well as the electoral victory of Frederick Chiluba here in Africa, a former trade union leader of mine workers in Zambia, in the first multi-party elections under the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, with the full and very active support of the Zambian Congress of Trade Unions. The third is when organized labor exposes neutrality in courts and focuses only on bread and butter issues for members, oblivious to other important matters that can only be addressed in the larger context of politics and governance. This model is waning in influence contemporarily, although it has been popularized in most Western European countries and in their colonies, where government's grievances against the influence of socialists and communists in trade unions created official pushback, thereby inducing or compelling passivity and indifference among conservative trade union leaders and alienated and unconscientized workers. Now, in the Nigerian context, we can identify or find all these tendencies amongst the trade union, amongst the organized trade union and labor movement in the country's political history. During colonial rule and the struggle for independence, for example, organized labor was divided between those who prefer aloofness or at best passive engagement and a focus on bread and butter issues, and those who perceive the need to link the struggle of the working people in the context of broader political struggle for national emancipation and independence through active engagement. For example, of the three labor centers in the 1940s, namely United Labour Congress, ULC, Nigerian Workers' Council, NWC, and the Nigerian Trade Union Congress, NTUC, only the latter increasingly made politically explicit demands and proceeded to, during the 1945 general election, forge a labor movement political party affiliation, resulting in Michael Imodu serving on the Executive Council of the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons. The others basically assumed a passive or what they call neutral in court disposition. With independence in 1960, the nationalists who replaced the colonialists increasingly perceived the labor movement as too radical and a nuisance to governance, especially when they began to demand for improvements in living conditions and wages, and literally closed up the space for labor political party affiliation. This largely resulted, for example, it was part of the great motivation on the part of the labor movement for the 1964 general strike, a remarkable, unprecedented exhibition of unity of purpose with relatively successful outcomes. So the frustration of activist labor leaders and radical socialists with the post-colonial political and governance processes, which were increasingly becoming anti-working people and obstructive of the aspirations of Nigerian workers or working peoples, led some of them to discountenance any alliance, collaboration, or support for the conventional political parties, ostensibly, and to join the political fray by fielding candidates and contesting elections on alternative, more radical electoral platform, that is by trying to create their own political parties. For example, in 1963, Tunji Otekbe led the formation of the first Nigerian Working People's Party, named the Socialist Workers and Farmers Party, or SWAFP. It was formed out of collaboration between the Nigerian Trade Union Congress, NTUC, led by Imodu, and the Nigerian Youth Congress, and other radicals or revolutionary intellectuals. It was the first time a working people's party was formed independent of other political formations. In 1964, just 1 year later, Michael Imodu and the Escotoyo led the formation of the Nigerian Labour Party out of a split from the SWAFP. In spite of Imodu's popularity as a labor leader and the Escotoyo's revolutionary and intellectual sagacity, the party was constrained in attracting or mobilizing workers for electoral political participation. With the onset of the military rule in 1966 and the suspension or banning of partisan politics, the potential activism, if not relevance of this party, was subverted. The lifting of ban on politics by the military in 1977-78 saw the formation of two workers' parties, namely the Socialist Working People's Party, SWPP, and the Socialist Party of Workers, Farmers, and Youth, later known as Socialist Workers' Party, or SWP. Some labor activists were involved, especially in the SWPP, but not the NLC or the trade unions. The NLC, as a central labor organization, had just been reorganized by the military regime, the Obasanjo-Murtala military, Murtala-Obasanjo military regime, an action perceived by radicals and socialists as aimed at controlling or taming the trade union movements. Even more significantly, S. Baba Aye in 2012 has observed, these parties could not participate in electoral politics independently on their own because they could not satisfy the requirement of registration imposed by the military. In 1988-89, under the IBB transition program, the Nigeria Labour Party was formed along with 12 others under the direction of the NLC, with initial partnership with a broad coalition of progressives. However, the regime banned all the parties and created the Social Democratic Party, SDP, and the National Republican Convention, NRC. Between 1990 and 1998, the military rulers, in my view, succeeded in not only clamping down on the NLC, but infusing divide and rule tactics within its ranks and destabilizing it, because the NLC had grown in influence in alliance with academic staff and student unions and other pro-democracy and civil society organizations. And by becoming strong and influential, the NLC was leading effective opposition to military regime from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s. Indeed, the NLC was banned between 1994 and 1998, and its offices occupied by an administrator appointed by the military, through which the complete destabilization of the labor movement was achieved, and from which it took many years to begin to recover. The current Labour Party, operating in the Fourth Republic, was formed in 2002 as a party of social democracy. It changed its name to Labour Party at its first convention in February of 2004. It was formed under the direction and influence of the NLC, especially the labor leaders who played key roles in the 1988-89 to 1993-94 labor movement's involvement with the military regime's politics of transition. Significantly, the traditional radical pro-worker ideology at the root of the formation of previous labor and the working people's parties was said to have been deliberately, I quote, mellowed down in order to attract into the party, I quote, big men who might have patriotic aspirations without being radical, end of quote. This may have set the stage for the current affairs in the Labour Party and its relationship with the trade unions and the workers, and in particular with the NLC. I will say more on this later. In summary, therefore, when we look at the historical evolution of the development of partisan engagement by the trade union movement, from 1963 to date, there have been at least 6 clear-spirited attempts by radical socialist and trade union leaders to form working people's parties and engage in electoral politics, admittedly with limited, if any, successes, majorly as a result of sectarianism and factionalism. In spite of the significant numbers of the working class on the electoral registers, workers' electoral support for the working people's parties in court has been marginal and minimal, if at all. Key leaders of the labor movement, even the ones with commendable records, when they ventured into electoral politics, went to other parties rather than contested on the platform of these working people's party. And I think the example shared to us by Comrade Adams Oshimole illustrates this. So a few pauses after reviewing this history would suffice. And I ask this. 1, could it be that trade union sectarianism and petty ideological quarrels obstruct the effective organization of the party and its popular appeal to the working classes? 2, could it be that labor bureaucrats dominated the Labour Party formation processes, bureaucratized and red-taped everything, I repeat the pauses. What could have explained the lack of popular mass appeal of these efforts to engage actively in politics through a working people's platform, created platform? So could it be that trade union sectarianism and petty ideological quarrels obstruct the effective organization of the party and its popular appeal to working classes? Could it be that labor bureaucrats dominated the Labour Party formation processes, bureaucratized and red-taped everything, and thus stifled party organization, mobilization, and its popular appeal to the working peoples? 3, could it be that workers have discerned selfishness rather than selflessness in those promoting such efforts and therefore kept away? 4, could it be that the personal political ambitions of some trade union leaders and radicals are the primary motivations driving these efforts, and the workers have seen through this? And 5, could it be that the increasing divorce of the rank and the file members of the trade unions from the leadership over union governance, the management of union finances, the lethargy in addressing the concerns, rights, and the aspirations of members is contributing significantly to the alienation and the apathy of workers from joining or being actively involved in working people's parties formed by trade unions and led by trade union leaders? I think these are important pauses for us to reflect as NLC commemorates its 40 years, and as we contemplate what the role of the labor movement should be in the future political dispensation in this country. Looking at some comparative experiences globally, notably the 2 examples I provided earlier on, that is the movement for multi-party democracy and Chiluba in Zambia, and solidarity in Poland, perhaps a few good lessons could be learned by trade unionists and labor movements on how not to engage in electoral politics. I'm glad that there are representatives of the labor movement from Zambia here. So if I make any mistakes in my rendition, maybe they can correct it. While Frederick Chiluba is a former popular trade unionist, seen as pro-workers, a defender of pro-workers' rights, rode on the crest of support of the Zambian Congress of Trade Unions, ZCTU, to lead the movement for multi-party democracy to electoral victory in 1991, defeating the United National Independent Party, UNIP, and significantly ending one-party rule. He neither, regrettably, promoted or protected the interest of the workers, nor deepened democratization or widened the democratic space. Within a short period of time, he reached accommodation with the IMF and the World Bank to aggressively promote market economy, accelerate privatization, and many detrimental policies to workers' interests. Indeed, he abandoned principles of good democratic governance, presided over rent-seeking, facilitated economic mismanagement and corruption, and tried unsuccessfully to amend the Constitution for a third term. The lesson, I believe, is that it was easy to opportunistically capitalize on the grievances of the working class, mobilized by harsh economic conditions, to access power opportunistically through electoral politics. But it does not guarantee that governance would be any better than it has been under an unousted authoritarian regime. Organized working class movements, therefore, have to remain vigilant and continue to struggle for good democratic governance, even under perceived friendly governments, which a working class party has installed, or a labor movement that has helped to win elections. And of course, that explained also why the ZCTU not only parted ways with Chiluba, but organized and put tremendous pressures in order to resist the imposition of the neoliberal policies which he has adopted from the World Bank and IMF, and to demand for the protection, defense, and advancement of the workers' rights. Now, if we look at the situation in Poland, upon winning presidential elections in Poland in 1990 and becoming its first freely elected head of state in 63 years, Lech Walesa led Poland into a transition from communist planned economy into a free market economy with privatization and IMF World Bank economic reform programs. His implementation of these policies was compounded by what many have termed as his confrontational style of governance, promoting factionalism amongst his own party. He lost allies, was said to be surrounded by, I quote, incompetent and disreputable people, end of quote, and he was accused to have authoritarian disposition, tending to concentrate power to himself or to his office at the expense of the parliament. Consequently, both Lech Walesa himself and Solidarity lost popular support at home, although he remained respectable abroad, especially in Western countries, because he led the transition of Poland from communism to a market economy, albeit, of course, with mixed results. For example, Solidarity was said to have 10 million members in 1983, which at that time represented 1/3 of the total working age population of Poland. and this was amid suppression by a one-party communist regime. It forced the government to negotiate relatively free elections in 1989, defeating the ruling party and forming a coalition government. Its leader, Lech Walesa, got elected president of Poland in the 1990 elections. By 2010, after a stint in power and a rising crisis of expectation of the Polish workers, its membership, that is Solidarity's membership, had dropped from 10 million to 680,000, and by 2011 had further dropped to 400,000. Lech Walesa's support within Solidarity waned, so he formed his own political party, which he named the BBWR in 1993. His support dropped to a 10% level, and he lost the presidential elections in 1995. He withdrew from politics and became preoccupied with highly remunerated lecture tours abroad. In 1997, he formed a new party, the Christian Democrats for the Third Polish Republic, on which platform he again contested presidential elections in 2000, but lost terribly, winning only 1.01% of the votes. I think it's time for reflections, and I think we need to tell ourselves some bitter truth. To my mind, this brief review of two examples which in the 1980s and the 1990s provided inspiration for the working peoples and radical socialists to get actively involved in politics through their own created and organized parties, have turned out to have serious challenges and to have failed to address the fundamental needs and the people in politics. I think, and I'm not saying that the labor movement should not engage in politics. All I am saying is let's learn from these examples in order, if we choose to engage, we deploy the right strategies and tactics and the organizational planning and platform for ensuring that we do not form parties that can join the electoral political fray and end up doing the same thing as those parties that we have formed these parties to fight against in the first place. So this notwithstanding, the labor movements have the legitimate right to believe that they can form their own parties which do better than conventional political parties in electoral politics. However, they have to draw significant lessons from these late 20th century experiences, and they have to adopt different frameworks and methodologies to avoid pitfalls and crass failure in governance, which fails to address the fundamental needs and aspirations of the people and the citizens. I think the key issues to focus on in electoral politics is that opportunism, selfishness, undemocratic and authoritarian dispositions, lack of personal integrity, corruption, lack of inclusivity, and inadequate preparation for delivering on good democratic governance beyond winning elections are factors which significantly could, in the governance sphere, undermine lofty objectives of a labor movement's engagement in electoral politics. The challenge then, to my mind, would seem to be what steps to take and how and in what manner in order to effectively address these factors under any circumstances. I now turn to the issue of labor and governance. It is significant to note that the labor movement's interest in governance globally and in Nigeria in particular, as indeed should be the interest of the working peoples, is not merely in fielding candidates for political offices through electoral politics, as important as that may seem. The primary interest should be not only who presides over policy formulation and implementation, as important as this is, but also primarily on how policies are conceptualized, how policies are implemented, and how beneficial these policies are to the Nigerian people, the voters generally, and in particular to address the fundamental needs and aspirations of the working people. Those whom we may have in court put there on our own created political platform or parties, as the examples provided illustrate, may not necessarily act on our behalf or promote, protect, and defend our collective interest. What this means is that the labor movement needs to constantly pay attention to both who is being elected as well as the processes through which they are elected, and once elected, the processes through which they conduct the business of governing and the outcomes as they impact on the citizens. What this means is that the scope of engagement in the political and governance arenas is very wide. It's not limited to fielding candidates and contesting elections, but involves engagement and participation in several other spheres of governance where a lot of value addition can be provided, and I think attention ought to be focused on this. Now, given this premise, I argue that it is necessary for the labor movement and the working peoples in Nigeria to intensify participation in the political and governance arenas, even while they work towards forming an effective party platform for electoral contestation and engagement. And these areas are: one, the electoral process. Workers must be mobilized to be engaged in the electoral process with a view to increasing and improving the integrity of the process. From advocacy and support for electoral reforms to promoting and defending the autonomy of election management body, to sensitizing and conducting voter and civic education, and to volunteering in the electoral processes and programs, such as registration of voters and even voting day activities. I argue that central to good governance and quality governance is the integrity of elections. And we quite often ignore it and pay attention to fielding candidates. And if the electoral process lacks integrity, no matter what party you create, no matter what candidates you field, the outcome will be the overwhelming dominance of the conventional parties and conventional professional politicians and their machinations in the electoral process. So we have tended to ignore these aspects of engagement and participation in the electoral process, and I argue that it's very important that we begin to refocus. Secondly, engagement with regards to policy and the legislation-making processes. The labor movement does this, and Comrade President has pointed to many examples of this, but we need to do more. Workers must be mobilized to be engaged in the policy and legislative advocacy and in putting pressure on elected executives and representatives to be responsible and responsive to the needs and the aspirations of the citizens. And the one clear example, I believe, is in the area of minimum wage, as we talk about it. You wonder, in spite of all the massive support that state governments have got from the federal government, with all kinds of resources being injected, many of them are still not even contemplating addressing that issue. And I say this notwithstanding what the Honorable Minister of Labor has said. So serious engagement at all levels with mobilization of workers in the policy arena and in the legislative making arena are very, very important in driving these changes. And you can achieve a lot and add value. You don't have to wait until you create your own party and field your own candidate who will then come and change all of this for you. So it's very, very important that we do not misplace our priorities and we weigh our engagement in these processes. The third area, of course, is in the economic arena. The labor movement does quite a lot in this through the trade unions themselves, in terms of engaging employers, in terms of trying to improve conditions of workers. But the labor movement must not relent on engaging, dialoguing, negotiating, and pressurizing economic actors, not just government, to accommodate and cater for the greater interests of workers in all fundamental respects. 4 is the area of partnership, but with credible civil society organizations in engagement in the policy and legislative arenas. The NLC generally, and trade unions in particular, need to recognize that forging and strengthening links and partnerships with credible civil society organizations is absolutely necessary for collective, effective advocacy in organizing pressure to influence policy and legislation-making processes. And the significance of this cannot be overemphasized. So having given you a lot to reflect on with regards to the role of labor in politics and also the role of labor in governance more broadly, what is my conclusion and which way forward? First, I wish to recommend that whatever trade unions do or the labor movement does with regards to involvement in and engagement with partisan politics, they must never forget the fundamentals, key amongst which is that advancement of the collective interests of workers is their primary core mandate, and that everything else is complementary if it is not secondary. From 1989 and through the 1990s, to my mind, mistakes were made when the NLC leadership at the head of the labor movement helped to create the Labour Party, which, as I mentioned earlier, was banned by the Babangida regime along with 12 others. And yet, the NLC leadership became engrossed after this banning of the party that they had created, with engagement in the politics of transition under military rule, almost to the total abandonment of short and medium-term collective interests of the Nigerian workers. Breaking with the good practices of the past efforts at forming a working people's party, this time, the necessity for forging broad, credible pro-workers alliances with progressives was ignored. And instead, incredible alliances were forged with reckless politicians to the extent that an NLC president literally abandoned NLC's traditional friends and alliances and literally ran with the hare and dined with the hound, trying to be made a vice presidential candidate of a political party, which was hurriedly created by the military regime. These are bitter things to say, and regrettably, perhaps in the current circumstances when the person in reference is no longer with us. But it is important to say this because even if the labor movement wants to get involved in electoral politics, it must be based on the basis of credibility and on the basis of credible alliances with other progressive forces. I think the subsequent effort to form another Labour Party in 2002 and 2004 arguably suffered from the consequences of that experience, and some of the key participants in the previous experience were also very actively involved in this later effort. And as I mentioned earlier on, the strategy that they deployed to attract big men and to mellow down on the ideological leaning of that party was a disastrous ideology. Because what is the result? The result is that the Labour Party accommodated all sorts of people in Anambra and Lagos, who ran under the platform of the Labour Party. And obviously, these efforts have literally now been hijacked by those so-called big men. So we must learn from these experiences. And while workers have a fundamental right, individually and collectively, to either join or to support or to form their own political parties to advance their collective interests and aspirations, labor leaders have an obligation to dispassionately study the situation and the context, to weigh the pros and cons, to deploy strategies of engagement that are credible, and to act responsibly under all circumstances. And if, in the end, the decision is made to form an independent political platform of the working people to field candidates for offices, then credible and competent cadres within the labor movement must be made to take charge of the process. A carefully designed manifesto and program of action must be put in place, and the NLC cannot, as it has done in the recent past, throw away its baby with the bathwater. When it helps, for example, when the NLC helped to create the party, it should not then keep an arm's length from that party or be indifferent on how the party is organized and administered. Additionally, the appropriate broad alliances need to be forged with those who subscribe to the working people's political agenda, who are not necessarily workers in the true sense of the word, but who are working class oriented, who are working class friendly, who are pro-workers and the working peoples in our country, but whose integrity can be vouched. These have to be, or there have to be broad alliances, obviously based on clearly articulated platform. In a country like Nigeria, political power, in fact, in most countries, I think we should not underestimate that, political power is difficult, if not impossible, to capture the electoral process on the basis of a single modular political platform that appeals only to a dispersed small segment of the voting population. The chances of victory are better with a political platform that has a broad popular appeal, that is not politically or even economically sectional, and that is above all with concrete potential benefits for the overwhelming majority of the people. Finally, as is generally said, those who want equity must come with clean hands. Workers need a political platform. Labor leaders must create them with integrity. operate them on democratic principles and core values of inclusiveness, transparency, accountability, selflessness, and competent and credible leadership cadres. Nothing less would attract the support and the active involvement of Nigerian working people. Nigerian workers, I argue, deserve better than what has been offered to them so far as a political platform for engagement in electoral politics. The Nigerian labor movement can do better and should get its act together to do much better than it has done so far. There is tremendous scope for this to be done. It may be a difficult task, but organization and mobilization and the disciplined conduct is the trademark of the trade union movement. And this can be deployed seriously and competently in any task that is undertaken, particularly a task as weighty and as important of creating a political party to advance the interests of the working people. I hope in these few remarks I won't say instigated you, but I hope I have I hope I have given you a lot to reflect on and to realize that working peoples in our country deserve better electoral processes, deserve better policy processes, and they deserve better governance processes. And all the working peoples in this country and the leaders of the working people in this country need to pay attention to engagement in all of these different spheres and sectors in order to bring remarkable improvements that can address the interests of the working peoples of this country. And if we have to engage in all of these spheres, there has to be reasoned, rational, objective analysis as to where to prioritize, where to give emphasis, and what to do simultaneously. These are very, very important matters, and we must not take them lightly as we have taken in the past. It is not sufficient to just say that we are a trade union movement, we have millions of workers, we want to create our own political party, and we will win elections. It is important to think hard and fast about what the nature of that party will be, what are the strategies to ensure that when that party is eventually created, there is no gulf between the engagement and the participation of the working peoples and the leadership of the trade union movement. It has to be truly a working people's party. It may be difficult, but it is not impossible to do. We must all pay attention to that. Thank you very much.
There is victory for us, victory. In the struggle for Nigeria, there is victory for us. Forward, forward, ever, backward, never. In the struggle for Nigeria, there is victory. Isoleto, Isoleto, Africa, that struggle and victory. Thank you, comrades. Thank you very much. Thank you, comrades. Thank you, comrades. Thanks. Comrades, now you know why the labor movement cannot move forward. You have heard from one of the best that the labor movement has produced. Comrade Jega has walked the talk, and the challenge is now for us to take the step forward. Comrades, are we ready to take over? Are we ready to take over? Are there Nigerian young workers here? Are we ready to take over? Thank you, comrades. I know that the chairperson of the NLC Youth Commission is with us, Comrade Ekbo. The challenge has been flung. We are still proceeding. From the program, you will realize that this could have marked the end. But we are proceeding because after this thought-provoking lecture, we are not going to go unchallenged. Comrade Adams Oshimole, chair of this occasion, is going to moderate a process of some feedback. Before he comes, I want to appreciate the strong representation of ASU, ably led by the current president of ASU. Comrade President, our dear Prof, we appreciate your presence, leading a very strong team of ASU. Thank you for coming. Comrade President will now do the rest.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the standing ovation that Professor Jega commanded says it all. You've raised very, very serious and fundamental issues. You've diagnosed the problems. You've attempted some, a doctor will say, some prescriptions, which if properly applied could lead to a treatment of the issues. And I just compare note with the president, Comrade Waba, that I am sure all of us in this hall, having listened to the guest speaker, we don't want to miss this opportunity to ask ourselves, did we really follow? And did we hear anything? Did we understand the essence of the message? And I think one way to test this is to allow, even if it is 1, 2, 3 persons from the floor, to make, even if it's 2 minutes comment, not more than that, based on the issues that have been raised by the guest speaker and how we tend to deal with those issues when we retire back to our respective unions and workplaces. If you accept this, we will just take 3 comments, and Professor Jega keeps saying, making a distinction between what we call labor leaders and trade unionists. Labor leaders be people like us who are the what we might call the labor bureaucrats, and the trade unionists being those who work in the factories. And so we will take comments, but we must ensure that we take comments also from the back, because I think that the solution lies substantially at the back. Yes, sir. Yeah, blue cap. Yeah, that is president of TUC. You have a microphone. If you don't have, come and pick this. While they are looking for a spare mic, you can have this. But
yes, Mr. Chairman, sir, thank you very much. I want to seize the opportunity to again appreciate our guest lecturer. And that brings us back to whether we are ready to take our destinies in our hands, or we want to allow the charlatans to take control of our fates. I did say when I was making my brief remarks, I said a similar thing that has been a kind of prescribed for us as solution. I said my encounter with the Speaker of the House of Representatives was like a challenge. He said, comrade, you are always coming here to appeal about minimum wage, how to give workers their rights. But you have forgotten, in the House of Representatives, we have 360 members. If Labour can organize themselves and just get 20 members of House of Representatives, you are already a minority in the National Assembly. And you are, by that status, an executive committee of the National Assembly. So nothing that can be discussed relating to workers that cannot be protected, even within the executive session. So you can even shoot it down at the executive session before it even comes out at the public arena. So that means we cannot wait to continue to plead, go and beg governors, go and beg National Assembly members, go and beg the president as to why we should be respected. So we have the powers in our hands. It's a matter of whether, like the lecturer has said, we have accepted that we have done some wrongs and we are prepared to amend and put our best first 11 to steer the ship of the labor interests. So, sir, we wholly agree with the submission of the lecturer, and we strongly believe that as labor leaders in this country, we need to go back to the drawing board and lead Nigerian workers rightly. Thank you very much.
I think Ejiofor would like to say something because a lot of the issues raised by Prof. Ejiofor had canvassed them. We need our movement. The need. Okay, Comrade Adeyemi. Anybody from the back?
Thank you, Chairman. I join others in congratulating Professor Atairu Jega. I think one important issue, which is extremely important to me, and I think, Prof, you need to speak to this more. You gave example of Zambia and Poland. I'm also aware that we have a preponderance of MPs that were elected on the platform of COSATU and serving the South African Parliament, who have also abandoned their constituency, the workers. When they got to Parliament, they started acting on their own against the interest of the workers. I do not see how we can also say, even in our quest to get a functional political party for labor and to get our own people into offices in these parties or in government, I do not know how we can succeed in getting people elected into offices, even on the platform of labor, that we have the interest of the working people at heart, that will be in office and do the bidding of the workers. There's a tendency that what happens in Zambia, in Poland, and what we have seen in the parliament in South Africa can also repeat here in Nigeria. As somebody who has filled both sides of the coins, you have been in the electoral body, so you know exactly all of the problems that are there. You have also been on our side there. Can you please tell us what are those attributes that we should be looking for beyond just wanting a labor party? Because we can have labor parties and we have human beings that we emerge and work against the working people. That's the first one. The second one is the issue of how we manage our parties. How we will not have characters that will manage these parties and corner the resources of the party into their pocket. Please, can you shed more light on this? Thank you very much.
It's not working. Hello? I understand we have Comrade Biodu want to have the mic. Biodu, where are you? SOZ. Okay, somebody's. All right. SOZ. Octopus.
Isolate you. I think there are three major issues that came from the conclusions by the guest speaker. And I think those three issues challenge us more in terms of how we act to it, not in terms of the rhetorics. Because for you to build a party that truly represents
we have to limit
the interests of the working people, the question to ask ourselves is this: the way we run our organizations now as trade unions, as labor movement,
just 1 minute.
Is it truly democratic?
Take the mic. Yeah.
Because the party process itself must be democratic. And I don't think it's a question of what required a rhetorical answer, but it's a question of our commitment, you see, to democratic practice. The second issue that came up, and that is the issue of character, which Jega talked in terms of integrity. Because integrity arises in the context of that contestations. Now, what do you do in a political party as a vehicle to transform the life of a people? If in those engagements in policy processes, because I ask myself, why don't we have an alternative to privatizations? Why must we engage privatizations on the context of the status quo? Because your integrity will be earned on the basis of how you push these issues to the generalities of the working people. The third one, and I think that is the lesson we must learn from that submissions. You cannot organize a working people parties just on the basis of trade union structures. There is a need for political mobilizations, political education, so that in the process of that, people who are participants in that party emerge on the basis of values, on the basis of work of that party, not on the structure that if you are a chairman of the NLC in the state, automatically you transmute yourself now into chairman of that party. And I think that is the point that is being made in terms of challenges or what we are prepared to do in terms of political mobilizations for such a working people's party. Thank you.
Sylvester Ejiofor. Now 2 minutes. Or 1.5.
I think the guest lecturer keep repeating one word. It is possible.
Speak to the mic.
He keep repeating one word. It is difficult, but it's doable. It is difficult, but doable. What it means is that to organize a working people's party, historically, you have to work. When we formed the Labour Party in 2003, we said it is not essentially and entirely an electoral party, but a movement that could go for elections when it is prepared for it. Unfortunately, mistakes were made for the very word go. So I believe that what he has warned that it is doable, it is difficult, but we must follow the path of having a party that will have two caps, a social political movement and a party committed to elections. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I understand we have a man of God, a gentleman from Cannes, Elder Ejodame Ewang. A man of God doesn't need more than 1 minute.
Elder Ejodame Ewang is HCPAN, Healthcare Provider Association of Nigeria. HCPAN, sir. Yeah.
And Issa, get ready.
Listen. Actually, I have a lot of take home from the discussion. Yes, take away. But the first there is, as we look forward to having a political party or other strategies, but we are already at a vantage position as organized labor to influence the system. We are already on ground to say he that play the pipe dictate the tone. As organized body, we are already in position to dictate the tone as we play the pipe. I don't see why we cannot articulate a bill. I know there's a provision for that, private bill to the parliament, and get our front articulated and make a follow-up. I go to issues like the minimum wage issues. They say if you keep on doing the same thing the same way and you expect a different result, that would be a kind of craziness, which has been the order of issues. Why can't we come up with a bill that will have that kind of give us a maximum wage that will not be a digit differential from the minimum? What am I trying to infer? To address the wage.
Thank you very much.
The wage gap. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Comrade Issa.
Well, let me also thank Professor Jega for very wonderful presentation. But my submission would be that, Professor Jega gave us two examples of where
Because
workers' participation in politics
it's only nice to have a lady,
had raised a lot of challenges. But the two examples you gave us, the Zambia example as well as that of Poland, those are examples that have not delivered the kind of desired results for the working people. I would have thought that Prof should also reflect on examples of where workers' participation in politics has been very beneficial for the working people. Here, the case of Brazil, where we are the Workers' Party that came to power under Lula, a trade unionist, ordinary worker who became president of Brazil, and transformed Brazil economically and socially. In fact, he lifted close to 50 million out of poverty, implemented minimum wage. Again, South Africa, just about 2 weeks ago, Cyril Ramaphosa emerged as the president of ANC. And you can see his pedigree as a unionist, capacity to negotiate, to get South Africa out of division for unity of purpose. I listened to State of Nation address in which he was talking of minimum wage, decent work for the working people, and all South Africans rally around him. So what I'm saying is that to have a balanced view of this presentation, I think we need to have examples of where, comrades in government have failed, but we also need the example where they have been successful, so that we can be inspired to make some progress. And we can see it here in Nigeria, and I listened to Comrade Adams very well. We can debate a lot about what you did in Edo, but you made a point that you saw the need to improve on minimum wage. I also know all the time we are battling over the attempt to delete labor issues from exclusive lists. You stood in spite of the resistance of your co-governors. And for me, if we are not in politics, we can't defend the working people. So I think Professor Jegab should give us some examples where we have gotten some results that are positive for the working people in politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sure, as you can see, Professor Jega, this is something that we will be able to discuss for over the next 3 days, because it's at the heart of every other thing, whether we are talking of the future of the working people, place of work. If we don't get the politics right, not much will follow. But I hope you did listen very well. My own take, sir, from your comments, the most easiest one, which I want to trouble our colleague with, is that as we speak, we're asking for a higher minimum wage. You don't have any difficulty in justifying that. We can argue how much more, but we can't argue whether it is desirable. However, as you have pointed out, how can we explain that even the 18,000 is not paid as and when due? Our president, President Muhammadu Buhari, has publicly said he does not understand how some employers sleep when their own workers have not been paid. Special bailout to bail out workers, not used to bail out salaries. What is NLC going to do about that? These are simple bread and butter. Because if you can't ride a bicycle, how will you ride a motorbike? So I think we do need to visit that. Number two, I'm happy the minister is here. The minimum wage panel. I heard from the NLC president that you have somebody on that panel who is not a nominee of NLC, is not a nominee of TUC. He has no business in that panel. And the minister cannot appoint a union leader on behalf of the unions. Those things have to be fought and rejected. Because you said the right thing, we must put our house in order. We must play the politics. But the state must abstain from providing safety to anyone who has chosen to be a rebel. There is one movement, or rather two central labor organizations. The government is free to nominate anyone, except that government is not free to nominate a trade union leader to post as representing workers when in truth he's not the workers' nominee. I want the minister to review that list and recommend to the president that that name be deleted. Because I know that President Muhammadu Buhari does not want to interfere in the internal workings of the trade union movement. The second is the paradox which Professor Jegas raised. There is no question that Imodu was not a labor aristocrat. I think Nigerians are unanimous on that. All labor historians are unanimous on that. Escotoyo, even in your own description, no question, he was not only ideologically clear, he was committed to the struggle till death. Now, they founded the Labour Party, and you rightly pose the question. These people cannot be said to be suspect in the court of the working people. How do we explain that the workers prefer to vote for the other parties except their own? For me, this points to real complexities that at the level of practical politics, there's a huge gap between the ideal and what is practicable. How you navigate, I think, is what might determine the final outcome. Because as you said, sir, you have like Walesa riding on popular movement and getting to power. And the first thing he did, or some of the things he did, was to dismantle the social fabric on which the movement was based. And the workers found themselves painfully having to vote him out. Then you have the story of Chiluba, which is not too problematic. Because Chiluba was about democracy, not so much about the content of that democracy. And I think for me, the question it raises, because the third leg of your argument, which is extremely important, is the issue of the integrity. It will appear that we will never know who has or lack integrity until you are entrusted with power. So, our comrades in Zambia trusted Chiluba based on his leadership of the movement of the Congress. But when he had power, that is when the real Chiluba comes out. Adia scientific means to predict that even the semi angels, when entrusted with state power, will remain angels. And if they want to move away, how do we keep them in check? I think I owe Ejiofor an apology, and I want to confess it to you, Professor Jega. You've been extremely nice in the way you have put some things. I happen to be the president of the NLC by 2002 when we formed the Labour Party. We call it Party for Social Democracy. What was our fears? That people might say, you know, I'm not a trade unionist, so I cannot join. Because like you said, there are non-trade unionists who are concerned socially with those values that band the union movement together. And we said, how do we encourage these ones? Nothing changed. Then we move on to change the name to to Labour Party, because many people keep saying to us, let's have a Labour Party. And then we formed it. We asked Ejiofor to be the interim chairman, and I believe the former general secretary of Norgay to be the secretary. Ejiofor rigidly tried to do exactly what you have said, sir. Call meetings in his area and get workers to attend to contribute to run the party. Not the way the establishment parties are run, where you join to take. I can now tell you from experience, in terms of the other systems, you join to take. But to build a movement that will be led by workers, driven by workers, just like the trade unions are funded by workers because workers pay union dues, and therefore you can describe the labor movements as the truly non-governmental, non-government funded, and therefore non-government control mass movement. But when it comes to the political terrain, the situation is different. After laboring for a couple of years, I confess, I called SOZ. I said, you be General Secretary of OCTA, Public Sector Workers Civil Service Technical, and Salam be former General Secretary of Norgay. People think if they are not trade unionists, this party is not for them. How do we get someone who has been a union leader and who therefore can provide leadership but is currently not in the union and is a lawyer, but I believe he understands the dream and the vision of the union world. That was how the man who took over from Ejiofor came in, and we had to persuade Ejiofor to step down. We didn't say to attract people with money. We said so as to remove the doubt that this movement is only for trade unionists. But as you can see, as I said, the rest is history. Ejiofor did warn me then that if we do this, we will lose the vehicle. But then I was overconfident. I said to Ejiofor, we can always call it back and collect our keys. What I didn't understand is that the organization we developed is so dynamic that my successors, hard as they tried, were unable to retrieve the keys. And the vehicle became what I call a public political taxi. If your vehicle breaks down, you take the Labour Party taxi, you get to office, use it. If you succeed, you abandon it. If you don't succeed, you abandon it. And the taxi wait for the next abandoned passenger. And I think for NLC leaders who attended meeting with the Governors Forum when the President 18,000 was proclaimed, they would forget that at that time, the Labour Party produced a governor in one of the southwest states. To my embarrassment, that Labour Party governor is on record in the Governors Forum as one of those leading the agitation for the abolition of a national minimum wage. What can be more embarrassing than that? So if you don't form a party, it would be better if you are fighting the opponent, you know, that your own instrument be used, against yourself. I also want to confess to my own limitations. I went to Edo State and I declared my ambition on the platform of the Labour Party. I left the NLC on the 18th of February 2007. And by April 14 of the same year, I was to participate in an election. That gave me about 2 months. I tried hard to try and contest on that platform. I understand I had to create structures in around 192 wards, open offices, and to my surprise, the working people expect me to fund it, to pay for the offices, to hire the typists, buy the typewriters, and above all, provide money for transportation to meetings and from meetings, and even the sitting allowance. I have 2 months to do this with no wages at that time, having left my job, and of all, NLC was not too generous, they didn't pay me any gratuity. And so I found myself entering into alliance with the then ACN, but convinced that there was nothing I was going to do as a governor on ACN platform that I would do as a governor on Labour Party platform. But of course, I faced that dilemma today. People ask me, you funded the house and you left it to compete on another platform. There are some practical difficulties in the real world. What I found is that politics, not only here, even in the UK, like you said, at a point, the Labour Party, more or less, appeared to be unelectable. The more left they go, the more they seem to distance themselves. And then they had what they call New Labour. And I can see folks now watching how I understand the internal politics of the Labour Party in the UK. New Labour was a moderate version of the original vision of left-based Labour Party that produced Tony Blair. And of course, by the time he signed an agreement with Washington and they were dropping bombs in Iraq, that couldn't have been the dream of those who founded the Labour Party whenever it was founded, which you very well documented as a researcher and as a professor. My own advice from my own experience is that sometimes the worst of us might well be better than the best of them, particularly if there are democratic structures to debate, to contest, to argue, to disagree, and to agree. But this thing will have to be done in the field. Many of NLC state councils, they may not want to hear this. When we ask them to support NLC in their states, some has to obtain permission from their state governors. This is the truth. They are worried for all sorts of things. But my conclusion, sir, is that Ejiofor did offer the solution while he was still very active. That we do need to build a cadre that is ideologically clear and sufficiently committed to certain working class values. That if we don't build those cadres, because sir, when I was in Kaduna, we had strong interaction with the left, other BBU, Bala Usman brought up, where young people like Issa Aremo and co. cut their teeth, and they were assisted to understand the crisis in society and that society is class-based and all of those issues associated with it. Today in the universities, to find people like Dikpo Fashino, who will join us in a protest in Abuja and get the police to tear his shirt and get arrested with me and is accused of tearing his own shirt and charged accordingly. To have clear left academicians in various universities to encourage young students so that the leadership, just like you have in ASU, you also have progressive leadership in NANS so that you can draw future leadership from this movement. I believe around the country now, those forces, if they still exist, they are rapidly declining. My fear is, like somebody said, if as a young man, you were never idealistic. You never dream of a perfect world. and you grow up like that, you are likely to end up as a fascist. So the young trade unionists that are here, who understand the deprivations at the shop floor, they must be encouraged, and NLC must provide the training, not 1 week training, not 2 weeks training. They must be properly trained to understand the theoretical foundation around which these issues are being canvassed. If they don't, hard as they will try, the movement will continue to drift. But I am convinced that, like it's happening around the world, we can see people moving to the extreme left, others moving to the extreme right. I think in Nigeria, as the crisis escalates, the real victims will find a common ground, whether they are those working in the factories or those in the ivory towers, or a section of the business community who themselves are beginning to see that those who run real business don't make as much money as those who collect rent, that along the line, the kind of alliance of your dream can be founded, and a broad new engagement will ensue, and the dream of our founding fathers will be realized in our own lifetime. Thank you very much. So, but I want to invite you, Professor Jagad, because I saw you making notes, if you wish to. Otherwise, you are not obliged to. All right. Minimum words, maximum wisdom. The professor said he has spoken. It's for us to digest it, and he hopes we find it nutritious. I believe your standing applause shows that you found his words very nutritious, and we have digested it, but not the typical biological digestion that you go and excrete later. This we will keep to strengthen us, to embolden us, and as Christians we say, to cover us with the precious blood of Jesus, so that we will fight the battle and get to the destination that you have envisaged for us. It's now for me to invite, I think this is the closing. This is the last one. We have to invite the Secretary General, himself a rugged militant, former ASU activist, and Peter Ozue, so you can walk a little faster than that. I'm assuming that you are younger than me, but I know you are not. Thank you very much.
Comrade Chair of this opening session of our 40th year celebration, the Honorable Minister, all invited and special guests, my function is to just express thanks and appreciation for all those who have made this morning into afternoon event a great success. First, when I look at the size of the crowd in this hall, that tells me that it has been a great success. We had anticipated when we were planning that we would have about 1,200 people attend. As of the last count I have, we have 1,879. So, largely for me, that has been a great success. But I want to start from Comrade Adams Oshomole, who chaired this occasion. We thank you for your time. We thank you for your insightful comments. And we thank you for having directed the affairs of this session. I want to thank Professor Atahiru Jega. Well, incidentally, like has been said, he's been in this struggle for some time. And we thank him for a very insightful
lecture, and very passionately delivered lecture. And I do hope that actually we will go and we will think, we will debate, we will ruminate on his delivery far beyond the program today. I thank you, Tairu, for being here and for being always ready whenever we call on you. And we look forward to continuous relationship. I want to thank the Honorable Minister of Labor, who is here, and we still look forward to more participation in the activities tomorrow and next. The past minister who was with us, he has left, but I want to thank him in absentia, specifically because he told me this morning, although we thought we sent invitations to all past ministers of labor, he said he didn't receive any. But he just saw the thing in the news and he felt he had to be part of the celebration. I want to thank him for coming, and we look forward to such more commitment to our cause. I want to thank international guests. On this occasion, they are numerous, so I'm not going to pick them one by one. But comrades, thank you for continuing your solidarity with us, and thank you for turning up. I want to thank His Excellency, the Ambassador of Norway, who left everything and came to celebrate with us. I want to thank the heads of a number of international organizations, FES, PENCOM, PITAD, and various others who have come to celebrate with us. We thank you for coming, and we hope that you will continue in the same spirit in the other events that are lined up for our celebration. I want to thank the national troop, the very brief intervention and interlude. They have left, but I think it was very useful. I want to thank the press, and then I want to thank the masters of ceremony, the two masters of ceremonies. I want to thank the head of service, who was ably represented by the permanent secretary. I want to thank brother, the president of TUC, and all others who have come out to celebrate with us. For the technical people, my appreciation to the multimedia team who have presented this process very effectively, and those who decorated this hall. As a matter of fact, I think by the time we'll finish, we will demand to carry this away and go and keep behind the president's office. Finally, I want to thank the organizing committee. The work that has gone into kickstarting this process this morning. Many of us will not know, but they have been working round the clock, even at night, to make sure that this happened. And now that it has happened on schedule, we know that it will also end on schedule. We thank you. We will still thank you much later. Comrades, we want to express our appreciation to all who have turned up, and we look forward to your turning up in these large and quality numbers tomorrow and the day after. I thank everybody. But just before we go, I want to please plead with all our international guests, the members of the organizing committee, all those in the two front rows, our special guests, to please wait. We will pilot everybody to outside to a bus, and we will go somewhere. For our other comrades, some lunch takeaway packs are outside, and they should please gently and in orderly fashion go and be served. We look forward to tomorrow, And I thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. See you tomorrow. Lunch is served outside. For our special guests, you will be accompanied by the president of NLC to our coaster bus. We want to appreciate our brother president from Pengasin, Comrade Johnson. Tomorrow we hope to have the president of Opta, Comrade Benjamin, who we erroneously omitted today. We'll have all of you available tomorrow. Thank you and God bless you. Goodbye. Johnson card. I don't know where I dump himself.